My daughter-in-law tried to force me into early retirement to become her free babysitter for 3 kids, so I exposed her secret plan to my son and how she'd been manipulating both of us. My son Duke, 29M, married his wife Sarah, 27F, 3 years ago. I, 52F, was thrilled when they got together. Sarah seemed sweet, hardworking, and genuinely loved my son. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital, and Duke had just gotten promoted to manager at the tech company where he'd been working since college. They bought a nice starter home about 20 minutes from mine, and everything seemed perfect. I should mention that I'm a single mom. Duke's father left when he was 8, and I raised him alone while working full-time as an office administrator. It wasn't easy, but we made it work. Duke and I have always been close. He calls me every few days, comes over for dinner at least once a week, and we genuinely enjoy each other's company. When he got married, I was worried things might change, but Sarah seemed to understand our relationship and never made me feel unwelcome. About 18 months ago, Duke and Sarah had their first baby, Hannah. I was over the moon to become a grandmother. I helped out when I could, bringing meals, babysitting occasionally on weekends, buying baby supplies. Normal grandmother stuff. Sarah seemed grateful, and I loved spending time with my granddaughter. Then about 6 months ago, Sarah quit her job. She said the hospital hours were too demanding with a baby, and they wanted Hannah to have a stay-at-home parent. Duke's salary could cover their expenses, so financially it made sense. I supported their decision completely. Here's where things started getting complicated. About 4 months ago, Sarah asked if I could watch Hannah one afternoon while she ran errands. No problem. Then it became twice a week. Then 3 times. Then she started dropping Hannah off in the mornings and picking her up in the evening. I work from home 2 days a week, so I thought I could manage, but it was getting harder to focus on my job with a baby around. When I mentioned this to Sarah, she said it was just temporary while she figured out a routine. She promised to find other arrangements soon. But instead of finding other arrangements, she started asking if her sister could also drop off her 2 kids at my house. Sarah's sister Estella, 24F, is a single mom with twin boys, Tyler and Jake, who are 4 years old. Estella works at a restaurant and has unpredictable hours. Sarah suggested that since I was already watching Hannah, it wouldn't be much more work to add 2 more kids. She said Estella couldn't afford daycare and really needed help. I said no. 3 kids under 5 years old is not something I can handle while trying to work. I explained that I have deadlines and conference calls, and watching Hannah already made my job harder. Sarah got upset and said I was being selfish. She pointed out that Estella is family now and we should help each other. She also mentioned that I had plenty of space in my house and wasn't doing anything else with my time. This comment bothered me because it suggested my job wasn't important. I've worked hard to build my career, and even though I work from home sometimes, I still have real responsibilities and deadlines. I'm not retired or sitting around doing nothing. Despite my objections, last Tuesday I came home from running errands to find all 3 kids in my living room. Sarah was there with Estella, and they had brought toys, snacks, and even a portable playpen. Sarah said they had an emergency, Estella had to cover a shift at work, and Sarah had a dentist appointment. They needed someone to watch all the kids for just a few hours. I was trapped. I couldn't say no with the kids already there, so I agreed to watch them that one time. But those few hours turned into 8 hours. Sarah's dentist appointment supposedly led to grocery shopping, then to meeting a friend for coffee, then to picking up dry cleaning. Estella didn't return until almost 10 p.m., saying her shift ran late. The next day, Sarah called and asked if I could watch all 3 kids again. She said it worked out so well the day before, and Estella really needed consistent help. When I said no, Sarah accused me of not caring about family. She said I was being selfish and that other grandmothers would jump at the chance to spend more time with their grandchildren. Then she dropped the bombshell. She said she and Estella had been talking, and they thought I should consider early retirement. They figured I had enough savings, and my skills would be better used helping raise the kids. Sarah said it would be better for everyone, the kids would have consistent care, Estella and Sarah could focus on their own things, and I would get to be a hands-on grandmother. I was speechless. They had apparently planned this whole thing without consulting me. They wanted me to give up my career, my income, and my independence to become their free babysitter. I told Sarah absolutely not. I explained that I'm only 52, not ready to retire, and need my income. I also pointed out that raising 3 young children is exhausting work that I didn't sign up for. I said I was happy to help occasionally, like any grandmother, but I wasn't going to become their full-time childcare solution. Sarah got angry and said I was being unreasonable. She accused me of not loving Hannah enough and claimed that good grandmothers make sacrifices for their families. She said Duke would be disappointed in me when he found out I refused to help with his daughter. Then she said something that really got to me. She said that since I raised Duke as a single mother, I should understand how hard it is to juggle work and kids. She said I had a chance to make things easier for the next generation, but I was choosing to be selfish instead. The conversation ended with Sarah hanging up on me. That was 3 days ago, and I haven't heard from her or Duke since. I tried calling Duke twice, but he hasn't returned my calls. Yesterday, my sister called me. Apparently, Sarah had reached out to other family members, telling them I refused to help with Hannah and was being difficult. According to Sarah's version, I'm being unreasonable and putting my job above my granddaughter's well-being. Now I'm getting calls and texts from relatives asking why I won't help my own family. My aunt said I should consider what's really important in life. My cousin pointed out that I don't have other grandchildren, so I should cherish this opportunity. Even my mother called to ask if I was having problems with Sarah and suggested I try harder to get along with my daughter-in-law. I'm starting to doubt myself. Maybe I am being selfish. Maybe good grandmothers would make this sacrifice. But I also feel like I'm being manipulated and pressured into something I never agreed to. I love Hannah more than anything, and I want to be part of her life. But I also don't think it's fair to expect me to give up my career and become a full-time babysitter for 3 kids. I worked hard to get where I am professionally, and I'm not ready to retire. Duke still hasn't called me back, and I'm worried that Sarah has convinced him I'm being unreasonable. I don't want this to damage my relationship with my son or prevent me from seeing my granddaughter. But I also don't want to be taken advantage of. Am I wrong here? Should I consider early retirement to help with the kids? Or am I right to set boundaries about what I'm willing to do? Update 1. I wanted to update everyone on what happened after my original post. Thank you for all the comments and support. Reading your responses helped me realize I wasn't being unreasonable. The day after I posted, Duke finally called me back. But the conversation didn't go the way I expected. He was cold and distant, which isn't like him at all. He said Sarah had told him about our conversation, and he was disappointed in my attitude toward helping with Hannah. I tried to explain my side, but Duke cut me off. He said Sarah was stressed about managing everything at home, and Estella really needed help with the twins. He said as Hannah's grandmother, I should want to be more involved. When I mentioned that they wanted me to retire early, Duke said it wasn't that unreasonable since I'm getting older and might want to slow down anyway. That comment stung. I'm 52, not 82. I'm in good health, I enjoy my work, and I need my income. But Duke seemed to think I was making excuses. Then Duke said something that really shocked me. He told me that Sarah was pregnant again. They had just found out the week before, and they hadn't planned to tell anyone yet. But now with another baby coming, they really needed family support. He said this changed everything and made my help even more important. I congratulated him on the pregnancy, but I also said it didn't change my position about early retirement and full-time babysitting. If anything, it reinforced why I needed to maintain my career and financial stability. Duke got frustrated and said I was being stubborn. He said Sarah's pregnancy was high risk because of some complications she had with Hannah, so she might need bed rest later on. He said they were counting on me to help with Hannah and potentially the twins too. I asked Duke when exactly they had decided I would be their childcare solution, because no one had actually asked me if I wanted this responsibility. He got quiet and then said they thought it was obvious that I would want to help. The conversation ended badly. Duke said he needed time to think about things, and he hasn't called since. But here's where it gets interesting. 3 days after that conversation, Estella showed up at my door with the twins. She said Sarah had told her I agreed to watch them while she worked. I was confused because I definitely hadn't agreed to anything. Estella seemed surprised when I said there must be a misunderstanding. She said Sarah had specifically told her that I was available to babysit starting that week. Estella had already arranged her work schedule around this assumption and couldn't find anyone else on short notice. I felt bad for Estella because she seemed genuinely confused, but I couldn't take on watching the twins. I explained that there had been a miscommunication and I wasn't available for regular babysitting. Estella looked upset and said she didn't know what she was going to do about work. After Estella left, I decided to call Sarah directly to clear up the confusion. When she answered, she sounded surprised to hear from me. I explained what had happened with Estella, and there was a long pause. Then Sarah said she might have gotten ahead of herself in telling Estella I was available. She said she thought after talking with Duke, we had reached an understanding about me helping more with the kids. When I said we definitely hadn't reached any such understanding, Sarah got defensive. She said she was under a lot of stress with the pregnancy and might have misunderstood our conversation. But then she asked again if I would consider taking early retirement to help with the kids. She said it would solve everyone's problems. I said no again, and Sarah's tone changed completely. She said she was disappointed that I wasn't willing to sacrifice for my family. She said other grandmothers would be thrilled to spend more time with their grandchildren, and she couldn't understand why I was being so resistant. Then Sarah said something that made everything click. She said she and Estella had been planning this arrangement for months. They had discussed how much daycare costs and how my house would be perfect for watching all the kids. She said they thought I would be excited about the opportunity. I realized they had been planning to use me as free childcare for months without ever actually asking if I was interested. They had just assumed I would go along with their plan. I told Sarah I felt manipulated and that they should have asked me directly instead of making assumptions. Sarah got angry and said I was being dramatic. She said family helps family, and I was being selfish by refusing. The conversation ended with Sarah saying she needed to protect her family from negative influences, and if I wasn't going to be supportive, maybe we needed some space. She said Duke agreed with her that I was being unreasonable. That was a week ago. I haven't heard from Duke or Sarah since. I sent a text to Duke asking if we could talk, but he didn't respond. I also sent a card congratulating them on the pregnancy, but I don't know if they received it. My sister called yesterday and said she ran into Sarah at the grocery store. According to my sister, Sarah looked exhausted and seemed stressed. When my sister asked about the baby, Sarah mentioned that childcare was becoming a real problem and that some family members weren't being as helpful as expected. I think Sarah is still telling people that I'm being difficult and refusing to help with Hannah. But I also think the reality of managing a toddler while pregnant and trying to help Estella with the twins is hitting her hard. Part of me feels bad that they're struggling, but I also feel like this situation was created by their unrealistic expectations. They never asked what I was willing to do or considered that I might have my own plans and limitations. I miss talking to Duke, and I worry about missing out on Hannah's life. But I also can't shake the feeling that they were trying to manipulate me into giving up my career and independence without any real discussion or consideration of what I wanted. I'm not sure what happens next. I hope Duke will eventually reach out so we can have an honest conversation about all this. But right now, it feels like they've decided I'm the problem because I won't go along with their plan. Update 2. I have another update, and honestly, I'm not sure how to feel about everything that's happened. About 3 weeks ago, I got a call from Estella. She sounded upset and asked if we could meet for coffee. I was hesitant because I didn't want to get pulled back into the childcare drama, but Estella said it was important and had nothing to do with babysitting. When we met, Estella looked exhausted. She said she needed to tell me something about Sarah that I deserved to know. According to Estella, the whole plan to get me to retire early and watch the kids wasn't just about needing help. Sarah had been telling people that she was doing me a favor by giving me purpose in my retirement. Estella said Sarah had been talking about how sad it was that I was getting older with no real family responsibilities. Sarah apparently told people that I was lonely living by myself and that watching the kids would give me something meaningful to do with my time. Estella said Sarah genuinely seemed to think she was helping me by creating this arrangement. This was news to me. I'm not lonely, and I definitely don't need someone to create purpose in my life. I have friends, hobbies, a career I enjoy, and plenty of things that keep me busy. But apparently, Sarah had decided I was a sad, empty-nest mother who needed grandchildren to fill the void. Estella also told me that Sarah had been pressuring Duke about my attitude for months. She said Sarah would complain to Duke about how I seemed distant or uninterested in Hannah. Sarah apparently told Duke that good grandmothers are more involved and that my lack of enthusiasm was concerning. This explained why Duke had been so cold during our last conversation. Sarah had been building a case against me for months, making it seem like I was the problem. But then Estella told me something that really surprised me. She said she and Sarah had a big fight about the childcare situation. Estella had been struggling to find reliable babysitting and was stressed about work. When Sarah kept promising that I would help with the twins, Estella started depending on that plan. But when it became clear that I wasn't going to provide regular childcare, Estella was left scrambling. She ended up having to quit her restaurant job because she couldn't find consistent babysitting for the twins. Now she's working part-time at a grocery store during school hours, making much less money. Estella said she was angry at Sarah for making promises she couldn't keep. She said Sarah had convinced her that I was already on board with watching all the kids, and Estella had made major life decisions based on that assumption. The fight between Estella and Sarah got ugly. Estella accused Sarah of manipulating both of us, me into feeling guilty and her into believing help was available. Sarah got defensive and said she was just trying to help everyone, but Estella said Sarah's real motivation was getting free childcare for herself. According to Estella, Sarah admitted during their fight that she had never actually asked me directly about regular babysitting. She said she thought if she started slowly with occasional requests, I would eventually agree to more. Sarah said she was sure I would come around once I saw how much the family needed help. Estella said she felt used and manipulated. She also said she felt bad for me because Sarah had been talking about me behind my back for months, building a narrative that I was selfish and unhelpful. After talking to Estella, I decided I needed to have a serious conversation with Duke. I called him and said we needed to talk in person. He finally agreed to meet me for lunch. When I saw Duke, he looked tired and stressed. I asked him directly what Sarah had been telling him about me, and at first, he was defensive. But when I pressed him for specifics, he started repeating things that didn't sound like my words or attitudes. Duke said Sarah had told him I complained about watching Hannah and seemed resentful about being asked to help. He said Sarah told him I made comments about being too busy with my own life to focus on family. None of this was true, but Duke believed it. I asked Duke to think about our actual conversations and whether I had ever said those things directly to him. He got quiet and admitted that most of what he knew came from Sarah's reports of our interactions. Then I told Duke what Estella had shared with me about Sarah's real motivations and the months of planning behind my back. Duke was shocked. He said he thought the childcare requests had been spontaneous needs, not part of a long-term plan to get me to retire early. Duke also didn't know that Sarah had been telling people I was lonely and needed purpose. He said that didn't sound like me at all, and he was surprised Sarah would characterize me that way. By the end of our conversation, Duke seemed to realize that Sarah had been managing information between us. He said he needed to have a serious talk with his wife about communication and honesty. 2 days later, Duke called me. He said he had confronted Sarah about everything we discussed. According to Duke, Sarah broke down crying and admitted that she had been overwhelmed and desperate for help. She said she never meant to manipulate anyone, but she was struggling with pregnancy symptoms and caring for Hannah while trying to help Estella. Sarah also admitted that she had made assumptions about what I wanted and needed in my life. She said she thought I would be happy to have more family responsibilities, but she realized she never actually asked me what I wanted. Duke said Sarah felt terrible about the misunderstandings and wanted to apologize. He asked if I would be willing to have dinner with them so we could clear the air. I agreed to dinner, but I told Duke that going forward, any requests for help needed to be direct and honest. No more assumptions or long-term planning without my input. The dinner was awkward at first. Sarah did apologize, and she seemed genuinely sorry for the miscommunication. She said she had been stressed about money and childcare and hadn't thought clearly about how her actions affected others. But I noticed Sarah still seemed to think the main problem was miscommunication, not the fundamental issue of trying to plan my retirement without asking me. She kept talking about how we could work out a schedule that worked for everyone, as if regular babysitting was still on the table. I had to be very clear that I wasn't available for regular childcare, regardless of how we scheduled it. Sarah looked disappointed but said she understood. Since then, things have been better but not completely back to normal. Duke calls me regularly again, and I've seen Hannah a few times. But I can tell Sarah is still frustrated about the childcare situation, and I think she's hoping I'll change my mind as the pregnancy progresses. Final update: this will be my final update on this situation. A lot has happened in the past few months, and I think the story has finally reached its conclusion. About 2 months ago, Sarah had some complications with her pregnancy and was put on partial bed rest. Duke called me to let me know and asked if I could help with Hannah occasionally while he was at work. I agreed to help when I could, but I made it clear that it would be occasional, not regular care. For a few weeks, this arrangement worked fine. I would watch Hannah maybe twice a week for a few hours. Sarah seemed grateful, and Hannah was always well behaved during our time together. But then Sarah started pushing boundaries again. She began asking if I could take Hannah overnight so she could rest better. Then she asked if I could pick Hannah up from daycare some days because it was hard for Duke to leave work early. Each request seemed reasonable on its own, but together they were building into the same pattern as before. The breaking point came about a month ago. I arrived at their house to pick up Hannah and found Estella there with the twins. Sarah said she had invited Estella over because it was easier to watch all the kids in one place, and since I was already helping with Hannah, it made sense to include the twins. I was frustrated because this felt like the same manipulation as before. I told Sarah I had only agreed to help with Hannah, not to provide childcare for 3 kids. Sarah got upset and said she thought I would want to help Estella too, especially since she was still struggling financially after having to change jobs. I explained that I sympathized with Estella's situation, but I couldn't be the solution to everyone's childcare problems. I said I needed to stick to clear boundaries about what I was willing to do. Sarah started crying and said she felt like I didn't care about the family's struggles. She said she was stressed about the pregnancy, worried about money with another baby coming, and felt like she had no support system. She said she thought grandmothers were supposed to help during difficult times. I felt bad seeing Sarah upset, but I also realized that nothing had really changed. Sarah was still trying to make me responsible for solving problems I didn't create. She was still assuming that my role as a grandmother meant unlimited availability and sacrifice. I told Sarah I cared about the family, but caring didn't mean I had to give up my own life and plans. I said I was willing to help occasionally, but I couldn't be their primary childcare solution. Duke came home during this conversation and found Sarah crying. When he asked what happened, Sarah said I was refusing to help with Hannah when she needed support during a difficult pregnancy. This wasn't exactly true. I was willing to help with Hannah, just not with all 3 kids on a regular basis. Duke looked tired and frustrated. He said he didn't understand why childcare had to be such a complicated issue. He said other families managed to work together and support each other without all this drama. I asked Duke what specific support he thought I should be providing, and he couldn't give me a clear answer. He just said he thought family should help family when needed. When I asked him to define what kind of help was reasonable to expect, he got annoyed and said I was being difficult. That conversation made me realize that both Duke and Sarah had vague expectations about my role that they had never clearly communicated. They expected me to figure out what they needed and provide it without being asked directly. When I didn't meet their unspoken expectations, they saw me as selfish or unsupportive. I decided I needed to be very clear about what I was willing to do going forward. I told Duke and Sarah that I would continue to be Hannah's grandmother and spend time with her regularly. I would help with occasional babysitting when asked directly and when I was available. But I would not provide regular childcare, overnight care, or care for children who weren't my grandchildren. I also said that any requests for help needed to be specific and honest. No more assumptions about what I wanted to do or would be willing to do. No more planning my involvement without asking me first. Sarah said she felt like I was being rigid and unloving. She said she couldn't understand why I wouldn't want to do more for my family. Duke said he was disappointed that we couldn't find a way to work together better. I left that day feeling sad but also relieved. I had finally been completely honest about my boundaries and expectations. Whether they accepted those boundaries was up to them. Over the next few weeks, contact with Duke and Sarah became minimal. Duke would text occasionally with updates about the pregnancy, but we didn't have real conversations. I sent gifts for Hannah's birthday, but I wasn't invited to the party. Then last week, Duke called with news. Sarah had given birth to a healthy baby boy. I was happy for them, but Duke sounded exhausted on the phone. He said the first few weeks had been really difficult with 2 young children and Sarah recovering from delivery. Duke asked if I wanted to come meet my new grandson. I said yes, of course. When I arrived at the hospital, Sarah was polite but distant. She seemed tired and overwhelmed. Hannah was excited to see me and wanted to show me her new baby brother. During the visit, Sarah mentioned that they had hired a nanny to help with both kids. She said it was expensive, but they realized they needed professional help to manage everything. She didn't look at me when she said this, but the message was clear: they had found another solution since I wasn't available. I was glad they had found help that worked for their needs. I told them the nanny sounded like a great solution and that I looked forward to being a grandmother to both Hannah and the new baby. Duke walked me to my car when I left. He said he hoped we could rebuild our relationship now that the childcare pressure was resolved. He said he missed talking to me regularly and wanted the kids to know their grandmother. I told Duke I missed him too and wanted to be part of the children's lives. But I also said that rebuilding trust would take time, especially after feeling manipulated and pressured for so many months. Duke nodded and said he understood. He said he and Sarah had learned some difficult lessons about communication and assumptions. He said they should have been more direct about their needs and more respectful of my boundaries. Since then, we've been texting regularly and I've visited twice to see both grandchildren. Sarah is cordial but not warm. I think she's still processing her disappointment about the childcare situation. But she's not actively hostile, which is progress. I don't think our relationship will ever be as close as it was before all this happened. Too much trust was broken, and too many assumptions were made on both sides. But we're finding a way to coexist peacefully for the sake of the children. I'm content with this outcome. I maintained my boundaries and my independence while still being able to have a relationship with my grandchildren. It wasn't the fairytale family dynamic that Sarah seemed to want, but it's honest and sustainable. Looking back, I think the main lesson is that family relationships require clear communication and mutual respect. Love alone isn't enough if people are making assumptions about each other's wants, needs, and obligations. I'm glad I stood firm on my boundaries, even when it was difficult and lonely. It led to a more honest relationship in the end. Now let's move to the next story. Story 2. My husband's sister ruined our wedding day and tried to break us up. Now she wants to make things right. I'm Alice, 30F, and I've been married to Eric, 32M, for 3 years now. We met at a friend's barbecue when I was going through a tough time in my life. I had just lost my job as a graphic designer due to company downsizing, and I was feeling pretty low. Eric was there as a friend of the host, and he immediately caught my attention with his warm smile and easygoing nature. We started talking, and I found out that Eric was a software engineer who had recently moved to the area for work. He was kind, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in my life and career. We exchanged numbers at the end of the barbecue, and he called me the very next day to ask me out for coffee. Our relationship progressed quickly after that. Eric was supportive during my job search, even helping me revamp my portfolio. With his encouragement, I landed a new job at a small marketing firm within a couple of months. As we grew closer, Eric opened up about his past. He told me about losing his parents in a car accident when he was in college, and how it had affected him and his older sister, Sarah, 35F. Eric and Sarah had always been close, but the loss of their parents brought them even closer. They were all each other had left, and they leaned on each other heavily during the grieving process. Eric spoke about Sarah with such love and admiration that I was excited to meet her, hoping we could become friends. However, my first meeting with Sarah didn't go as I had hoped. We met for dinner at Eric's apartment, and from the moment Sarah walked in, I could feel her cold demeanor. She barely acknowledged me, focusing all her attention on Eric. Throughout the evening, she made subtle comments that made me feel uncomfortable. For example, when Eric mentioned that I had recently started a new job, Sarah said, "Oh, that's nice. At least you're not unemployed anymore." Her tone implied that she thought my job was somehow inferior. I tried to brush off her behavior, thinking maybe she was just having a bad day. But as time went on and we had more interactions, it became clear that Sarah's attitude towards me wasn't going to change. She'd often forget to invite me to family gatherings, or make backhanded compliments about my appearance or career. Once, at a family barbecue, she loudly reminisced about Eric's ex-girlfriend, talking about how smart and accomplished she was, all while looking pointedly at me. Eric noticed Sarah's behavior and often spoke to her about it, but she'd always have an excuse or claim he was misinterpreting things. She'd say things like, "Oh, I didn't mean it that way," or "You're being too sensitive, Eric. I'm just looking out for you." Despite Sarah's attitude, my relationship with Eric continued to grow stronger. After 2 years of dating, during which we moved in together and adopted a rescue dog named Max, Eric proposed. It was a beautiful, intimate moment in our favorite park, with Max running around us excitedly. I was overjoyed and said yes without hesitation. When we announced our engagement to Sarah, Her reaction was less than enthusiastic. She forced a smile and said, "Well, I guess congratulations are in order." Then she immediately started talking about how we needed to have a long engagement to really be sure about our decision. The real trouble started when we began planning our wedding. Sarah insisted on being heavily involved, claiming she knew Eric's tastes better than anyone. She tried to change every decision we made, from the venue to the color scheme. When we chose a beautiful garden venue, Sarah argued that an indoor venue would be more practical. When we decided on a blue and silver color scheme, Sarah insisted that Eric had always loved green and gold. Every time we stood our ground on a decision, Sarah would guilt-trip Eric by bringing up their parents. She'd say things like, "Mom always wanted your wedding to be in a church," or "Dad would have loved to see you in his old cufflinks, not those new ones Alice picked." The week before the wedding, Sarah called Eric in tears, saying she had found some old home videos of their parents that she wanted to include in a surprise slideshow at the reception. Eric was touched by the idea and agreed without consulting me. I was a bit uneasy about the surprise element but didn't want to upset Eric by objecting. On our wedding day, everything seemed perfect until the reception. The ceremony was beautiful, and I felt like the luckiest woman in the world as Eric and I exchanged vows. But when it was time for the slideshow, I realized something was wrong. Instead of a tribute to Eric's parents, the video was a compilation of Eric's childhood and teenage years, with a focus on his relationship with Sarah and his ex-girlfriends. There were barely any recent photos, and I was only in 2 or 3 shots, always at the edge of the frame. I tried to keep my composure, but I could feel tears welling up in my eyes. I looked at Eric, who seemed uncomfortable but didn't say anything at the moment. After the slideshow, Sarah made a speech about how she'd always be the most important woman in Eric's life, barely acknowledging me or our marriage. The rest of the reception was awkward. Many guests commented on the strange slideshow and speech. I tried to enjoy our first dance and cake cutting, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of hurt and embarrassment. After the wedding, Eric was furious with Sarah. He called her and told her that her behavior was unacceptable and that she owed both of us an apology. Sarah played innocent, claiming she thought the slideshow was a beautiful tribute and that I was being overly sensitive. This led to a big fight between them, with Sarah accusing me of turning Eric against her. She said that I was trying to erase their family history and that Eric was betraying their parents' memory by choosing me over her. Eric stood his ground and told Sarah that if she couldn't respect our marriage, she wouldn't be a part of our lives. He suggested she seek therapy to deal with her issues. Sarah hung up on him and hasn't spoken to us since. It's been 2 months since our wedding, and the situation with Sarah is still unresolved. Eric is torn between his love for me and his bond with his sister. He's tried reaching out to Sarah a few times, but she either ignores him or sends nasty text messages about me. I feel guilty for coming between Eric and his only remaining family, but I'm also angry and hurt by Sarah's actions. I don't know if I can ever have a relationship with her after what she did at our wedding. The whole situation has put a strain on our newlywed life. Instead of enjoying this time together, we're constantly stressed about family drama. Eric and I have discussed the possibility of couples counseling to help us navigate this situation. We both want to move forward and enjoy our new life together, but Sarah's shadow looms over our relationship. Eric is struggling with feelings of guilt and loyalty, while I'm battling insecurity and resentment. We've tried to focus on positive things, like settling into our new home and planning for the future. We've talked about starting a family of our own in a year or 2, but even that conversation is tainted by thoughts of how Sarah might react or interfere. I've suggested that maybe we should consider moving to a different city to get some distance from the situation, but Eric is hesitant to leave the area where he grew up and where he feels close to his parents' memories. I understand his reluctance, but part of me wishes we could just start fresh somewhere new. My own family has been supportive throughout all of this. My parents and siblings love Eric and have tried to make him feel like part of our family. They've been a great source of comfort, but I know it's not the same as having his own family support our marriage. I don't know what to do. Should I try to mend things with Sarah for Eric's sake? Should we maintain no contact? Am I overreacting to the whole situation? The thought of having to deal with Sarah's hostility for the rest of our lives is daunting, but I also don't want Eric to lose his only sibling because of me. I love Eric more than anything, and I want us to have a happy life together. But I never imagined our first months of marriage would be filled with so much tension and family drama. Any advice on how to handle this situation would be greatly appreciated. Update 1. Thank you all for your supportive comments and advice on my original post. A lot has happened in the past few weeks, and I wanted to give you an update on the situation with my sister-in-law, Sarah. About a week after my post, Eric and I decided to take the advice of many commenters and seek couples counseling. We found a therapist who specializes in family conflicts, and we've had 3 sessions so far. It's been helpful to have a neutral third party to discuss our feelings with and to get strategies for dealing with Sarah. During our second session, Eric revealed something that shocked me. He told me that Sarah had reached out to him privately, claiming that she had some concerns about me that she wanted to discuss without me present. Eric, wanting to keep the peace, agreed to meet her for coffee. At their meeting, Sarah dropped a bombshell. She told Eric that she had hired a private investigator to look into my past, and that the PI had uncovered some disturbing information about me. According to Sarah, the investigator found out that I had been married before, something I had never mentioned to Eric or his family. When Eric told me this in our counseling session, I was stunned. It was true that I had been married before, but it wasn't some dark secret I was hiding. My first marriage was very brief. I got married young, at 22, to my college boyfriend, Mark. We had been together since freshman year and thought we were ready for marriage right after graduation. But we quickly realized we had made a mistake. We had different goals and values, and we struggled to adjust to adult life together. After only 6 months, we decided to divorce amicably. I hadn't mentioned this to Eric because it felt like ancient history. I was embarrassed about my youthful naivety and didn't think it was relevant to our relationship. In the early days of dating Eric, I had considered telling him, but the right moment never seemed to come up. As time went on, it felt awkward to bring up something that happened so long ago. I explained all of this to Eric and our therapist. I also shared more details about that time in my life. After the divorce, I had gone through a period of self-reflection. I traveled for a bit, worked on my career, and focused on personal growth. It was during this time that I realized what I truly wanted in a partner and in life, which ultimately led me to be ready for a serious relationship when I met Eric. Eric was hurt that I hadn't told him about my previous marriage, but he understood why I hadn't brought it up. What bothered him more was Sarah's extreme actions in hiring a PI to investigate me. He felt it was a huge invasion of privacy and a sign of Sarah's unhealthy obsession with our relationship. The therapist helped us work through our feelings about this revelation. Eric acknowledged that while he wished I had told him about my first marriage, it didn't change how he felt about me. We both agreed that Sarah's actions were a severe breach of privacy and trust. With the therapist's guidance, we decided that Eric would confront Sarah about her actions. He called her and put her on speakerphone so I could hear the conversation, with our therapist present for support. Eric told Sarah that he knew about the private investigator and that he was deeply disappointed in her behavior. Sarah tried to defend herself, saying she was just looking out for Eric's best interests. She accused me of being a liar and suggested that I might be hiding other secrets. Eric shut her down firmly. He told her that my past was my business to share when I felt comfortable, and that her actions were unacceptable. He made it clear that if she couldn't respect our privacy and our marriage, she would not be welcome in our lives. Sarah didn't take this well. She began crying and accusing me of brainwashing Eric. She said that I was tearing their family apart and that their parents would be ashamed of Eric for choosing me over her. Eric remained calm but firm, telling Sarah that she needed to take responsibility for her own actions instead of blaming everything on me. The call ended with Sarah hanging up on us. Eric was visibly shaken afterward, but he told me he felt relieved to have finally stood up to his sister. Our therapist praised Eric for setting clear boundaries and suggested we take some time to process everything before deciding on our next steps. In the days since that call, Sarah has been constantly messaging Eric. Some messages are angry, accusing him of abandoning her. Others are pleading, begging him to reconsider. She's even reached out to some of Eric's friends, trying to get them to talk sense into him. She's told them that I'm manipulating Eric and trying to cut him off from his family and friends. Eric has been amazing through all of this. He's ignored Sarah's messages and asked his friends not to get involved. He's also been incredibly supportive of me, reassuring me that none of this is my fault and that he doesn't regret marrying me. We're still trying to figure out our long-term plan for dealing with Sarah. For now, we've decided to maintain no contact. We've blocked her on our phones and social media, and we're considering changing our phone numbers if she doesn't stop trying to contact us. This situation has brought up a lot of emotions for both of us. Eric is grieving the loss of the relationship he thought he had with his sister. He's also dealing with anger and betrayal over her actions. For me, I'm relieved that everything is out in the open now, but I'm also feeling guilty about not sharing my past marriage with Eric earlier. I'm working on forgiving myself and remembering that I didn't have malicious intent in not sharing that information. Our therapist has been helping us work through these feelings. She's encouraged us to focus on strengthening our relationship and supporting each other. We've been making an effort to have regular date nights and to talk openly about our feelings. We're also focusing on building our own family traditions. We've started having Sunday dinners with my family, and we're planning a small Thanksgiving gathering with some close friends. It's helping us remember that family isn't just about blood relations, but about the people who love and support us. Thank you all again for your support. This situation is far from resolved, but we're taking it one day at a time. I'll update again if there are any significant developments. Update 2: I want to thank everyone for their continued support and advice. The situation with Sarah has taken some unexpected turns, and I felt it was time for another update. About a month ago, Eric and I were surprised to receive a letter from Sarah. It wasn't the angry or pleading message we expected. Instead, it was a formal apology. Sarah wrote that she had started seeing a therapist and realized that her behavior towards me had been inappropriate and harmful. She acknowledged that her actions stemmed from her unresolved grief over losing her parents and her fear of losing Eric, the only family she had left. In the letter, Sarah explained that her therapist had helped her understand how her grief had morphed into an unhealthy attachment to Eric and a fear of change. She recognized that her behavior had been controlling and manipulative, and she expressed genuine remorse for the pain she had caused us. Eric and I discussed the letter in our therapy session. Our therapist suggested that while the apology was a positive step, we should be cautious about immediately letting Sarah back into our lives. We decided to respond with a brief email, thanking Sarah for her apology and expressing hope for her continued progress in therapy, but maintaining our boundaries for the time being. We thought that would be the end of it for a while, but we were wrong. 2 weeks after we sent our response, we received a call from the local hospital. Sarah had been admitted after a car accident. She wasn't critically injured, but she did need surgery for a broken leg. Eric was listed as her emergency contact, and the hospital needed someone to make decisions about her care. We were torn about what to do. On one hand, we had been maintaining no contact. On the other, this was a genuine emergency, and despite everything, Sarah was still Eric's sister. After a long discussion, we decided that Eric would go to the hospital to handle the necessary paperwork and ensure Sarah was getting proper care, but that I would stay home. We felt this was a good compromise. Eric could fulfill his family obligations without putting me in an uncomfortable position. However, when Eric arrived at the hospital, he discovered something that changed everything. Sarah wasn't alone. She was accompanied by a man named David, who introduced himself as Sarah's fiancé. Eric was shocked. Sarah had never mentioned being in a relationship, let alone being engaged. David explained that he and Sarah had been dating for almost a year, but Sarah had kept their relationship a secret from Eric. Apparently, Sarah had been so focused on her imagined competition with me that she neglected to share this significant part of her life with her brother. Eric spent some time talking with David while Sarah was in surgery. He learned that David was a widower who had lost his wife to cancer 3 years ago. He and Sarah had met at a grief support group, and their shared experiences had brought them closer. David seemed like a kind and grounded person, and he had been encouraging Sarah to reconnect with Eric and make amends. When Sarah woke up from surgery, she was surprised and embarrassed to see Eric there with David. Eric kept things civil, focusing on her health and the necessary medical decisions. Before he left, he told Sarah that he was glad she had found someone and that he hoped she would be honest with David about everything that had happened. This revelation has thrown us for a loop. On one hand, we're glad that Sarah has someone in her life and hope that this relationship has been a positive influence on her. David seems to be a stabilizing presence, and his own experience with loss might help Sarah process her grief in a healthier way. On the other hand, we're hurt and confused about why she kept this a secret, especially given how much she claimed to value family and openness. It feels hypocritical that she accused me of keeping secrets when she was hiding such a significant part of her life. Eric is particularly struggling with this news. He feels betrayed that Sarah hid such a big part of her life from him, especially after accusing me of keeping secrets. He's also worried about David and whether Sarah has been honest with him about her past behavior. We've discussed this development in our therapy sessions, and our therapist has encouraged us to view this as an opportunity. Sarah's engagement could mean that she's moving forward with her life and may be less fixated on interfering with our relationship. However, the therapist also cautioned us about getting too optimistic too quickly. The therapist suggested that if we decide to reconnect with Sarah, we should do so slowly and with clear boundaries. She recommended that we start with short, public meetings and gradually increase contact if things go well. For now, we're maintaining our distance, but we're open to the possibility of carefully rebuilding our relationship with Sarah in the future, if she continues to show genuine change and respect for our boundaries. We've decided to send Sarah a card wishing her a speedy recovery and congratulating her on her engagement, but we're not rushing into anything more than that. This situation has reminded us that people are complex and capable of change, but also that trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. We're cautiously optimistic but proceeding with care. In the meantime, Eric and I are focusing on our own lives. We've started looking into buying a house, thinking about starting a family, and planning for our future together. These positive steps are helping us move past the drama and focus on building the life we want. We're also working on strengthening our own relationship. The stress of the situation with Sarah had taken its toll, but we're committed to supporting each other and communicating openly. We've started a new tradition of weekly check-in talks where we discuss our feelings and any concerns we might have. I'll update again if there are any more significant developments. Thank you all for your continued support and advice. It means more than you know to have a community to turn to during these challenging times. Update 3: It's been a while since my last update, and I wanted to share how things have progressed with our family situation. After Sarah's accident and the revelation of her engagement, things were quiet for a while. We sent the card as planned, and Sarah responded with a thank you note that was polite but distant. We took this as a good sign. She was acknowledging our gesture without pushing for more than we were ready to give. About 2 months ago, we received an invitation to Sarah and David's wedding. The invitation came with a handwritten note from Sarah, asking if we could meet to talk before the wedding. After discussing it in therapy and between ourselves, Eric and I agreed to a meeting. We met Sarah and David for lunch at a neutral location. It was awkward at first, but as the meal progressed, the tension eased. Sarah seemed different, more relaxed and self-aware. She apologized again for her past behavior, this time in person and with more specificity about the harm she had caused. What surprised us most was David's presence. He was fully aware of the situation between us, including Sarah's actions at our wedding and her hiring of a private investigator. Sarah had told him everything during her recovery from the accident, realizing that if she wanted a healthy relationship with him, she needed to be honest about her past. David shared that he had encouraged Sarah to continue with therapy and to make amends with us. He also assured us that he understood our caution and respected our boundaries. It was clear that David had been a positive influence on Sarah, helping her work through her issues in a healthier way. During the lunch, Sarah explained more about her journey. She talked about how therapy had helped her recognize her unhealthy attachment to Eric and her fear of abandonment. She acknowledged that she had projected her own insecurities onto me and our relationship. Sarah also shared that meeting David had been a turning point for her, showing her that she could have a fulfilling relationship of her own instead of trying to control Eric's life. The lunch ended on a cautiously positive note. We didn't make any grand promises of reconciliation, but we did agree to keep lines of communication open. We decided to start with occasional text messages and maybe a monthly phone call, with the possibility of more frequent contact if things continued to go well. Since then, we've had a few more meetings with Sarah and David. Each time, Sarah has shown continued growth and respect for our boundaries. She stopped trying to compete with me for Eric's attention and seems genuinely happy in her relationship with David. After much discussion and soul-searching, Eric and I decided to attend Sarah and David's wedding last weekend. It was a small, intimate affair, very different from the grand event Sarah had pushed for at our wedding. During the reception, Sarah made a speech that touched us deeply. She spoke about the importance of family, not just the one you're born into but the one you choose. She thanked David for helping her become a better person, and she publicly apologized to Eric and me for her past behavior, expressing hope for a renewed relationship. The wedding gave us a chance to see how much Sarah has changed. She was relaxed and happy, focusing on her relationship with David rather than trying to control Eric. She made an effort to include me in conversations and even introduced me to some of her friends as her sister-in-law, which felt like a significant step forward. We're not naive enough to think that everything is perfect now. Years of hurt and mistrust can't be erased overnight. But we're cautiously optimistic about the future. We've agreed to slowly rebuild our relationship with Sarah, maintaining open communication and firm boundaries. This experience has taught us a lot about family, forgiveness, and the capacity for change. It's also strengthened our own relationship. Eric and I have become better at communicating and supporting each other through difficult times. We're taking things one day at a time, but for the first time in a long while, we feel hopeful about having a positive relationship with Sarah. It's not the dramatic conclusion some might have hoped for, but real life rarely has neat, tidy endings. We're okay with that, and we're looking forward to writing the next chapter of our family story together. As for Eric and me, we're doing well. We've bought a house and are settling into our new home. We're talking about starting a family in the near future, and for the first time, the thought of including Sarah in that part of our lives doesn't fill me with dread.